Okay, this is a video that I've been meaning to do for years, and it's going to be fairly involved and probably pretty boring if this doesn't apply to you, but you might still find it interesting. Anyway, let's just get started. So yeah, we're going to talk about basically how to get started with the Yamaha MU2000 EX. I mean, you can use this for many of the later Yamaha modules, but this is specifically about the MU2000, as it's generally one that there's very little information on. There's no English manual, and it's got lots of features. Now, to start off with, I am not a music specialist. I'm not a composer. I'm a complete beginner myself. If I'm lucky in my lifetime, I'll use all of 5% of the capabilities of this thing. So if you're looking in for actual music composition info and, you know, what does polyphony mean and that kind of stuff, this video isn't going to help you much. This is really just for all those people that are just like me, that just bought one of these things and it's like, now okay, what the hell do I do with it other than just play ancient MIDIs through it. So we're going to start with the hardware setup. So, as far as connecting to your modern computer, you have several options. I think most people probably just have a unit loose, and you can connect it straight to your computer via USB. Thankfully, all of Yamaha's USB-based MIDI stuff all uses the same generic Yamaha USB MIDI driver, and you can download this right off their webpage. And in fact, they recently updated, so yes, it does officially support 64-bit Windows 10. I'm personally using 764-bit, but yes, the driver does exist for Windows 10, so you can still plug this thing straight into your computer via USB. I personally don't do that, though. I actually have it connected for the Yamaha UW500. This is essentially you can kind of think of this as an external sound card, as well as a USB MIDI interface. As you can see, you've got your output for your headphones, as well as some mono inputs in the front, a digital input and output, and a whole mess of crap on the back here. Basically, I use this number one because it came with the unit, and this is one of those things that I never heard of, but once I got it, I realized that I'm so glad I did. With the MU2000 and most of the later Yamaha modules, I'm no audiophile, but I can tell, and I know most people can too, that the internal DAC in this thing isn't really very good. For best results and for best quality, and especially if you're going to spend the money and buy one of these things, you should definitely be using the digital output on the back. So what I do is I pump that into the UW500, which actually has a digital input as well as an output. The output is really meant for more like an MD player, because all this stuff is like 10 years, 15 years old now. But anyway, this isn't the best DAC in the world, or the other way too. It goes both ways also, digital to analog and analog to digital. But anyway, what's nice about this is, basically, for example, if I'm doing a digital recording, I can take the digital audio that comes out of the MU2000, pump it in through here, and this sends it straight through USB into the computer, meaning I can record off of this. I can record from MIDI into real audio, typically a WAV file, without any digital to analog conversions whatsoever until it actually comes back out and hits my speakers. I mean, quality-wise, this thing is, I would say, prosumer. It's definitely not audiophile or professional level, but for my purposes, I'm very satisfied with it. It's also got other features. I mean, it's going to be hard to see, and I'm not taking it all apart, but on the back here, you have a set of regular MIDI inputs, input and output, which the way Yamaha built the system is this is where you would plug in your keyboard. And then the module itself is connected via the serial 2-host connector here, and what this allows me to do is have the UW500 as well as the MU2000 all connected to the computer with just one single USB cable. It's actually very convenient. It also just has some other nice little features, especially for my personal setup, since, you know, I've got an X68000 computer here, and I use FM Towns as well, and basically how this thing works is on the back there's a switch between digital and analog mode, and you can only select one or the other, meaning if you're using the digital input, these analog inputs don't work. However, there is also an auxiliary input on the back, which is basically just a pass-through. So what this means is if I'm running, say, an X68000 game like, I don't know, like Chojin, which actually can mix the Roland SC55 MIDI with the internal FM, what I can do here is, like, basically all my, like, for example, the CM64, that goes in here, the X68000 audio, that goes in here, and this mixer output goes into the auxiliary input on here. Meaning, when I use this little volume knob here, this will adjust, you know, the MU2000 volume level, but it does not affect the auxiliary input. That I can change just by using the output on the up here. So what this means is that even if I'm using this in its digital output mode, and I've got analog audio coming in, I can still mix them together and send them both to the computer in real time and record in real time with no lag, no dropouts, no nothing. Very, very useful as an X68000 user, because I can just combine the analog plus digital all into the same line, going for the same USB cable. It matches up, and just in one recording, boom. And that's generally how I make all my audio recordings when I do, like, music videos and stuff. But anyway, this is technically optional, but it is quite useful in this scenario, especially if you're like me. And also it does have, you know, a standard set of MIDI DINs on the back, which Yamaha designed it so that's where you'd plug in your keyboard, so you can control the entire system basically through this in your computer. But it also is just a standard set of, you know, MIDI ports. So for example, if I'm playing like an old DOS game like X-Wing Collector CD on my computer, I can just use I can send the MIDI for the DIN output on this into my CM64 here, so I can still play all the old, like the, you know, MT32 and pretty much whatever I want with very little changing of cables around, and basically just turn it on. So for me, it's a very convenient system. Also, again, I have both of these because they came together. I originally purchased the Hello Audio 2000 pack, which comes with this, and the very important software, which we will get to in a minute. So just a few notes might save you some trouble when you use this thing. Obviously, of course, first you need to have this turned on with the little USB light if you're using, you know, the computer. Also, you'll notice I've got it set up to Mac. If you're connecting this or any MU module, or even if you connect a Roland module, which will also work, to the UW500 using the serial 2-host connector, you want the 2-host setting on the module, the little switch in the back, set to Mac. But of course, if you're using the direct USB, obviously USB. But yes, even on a PC, you want it set to Mac. That's how these function together. Okay, so after that, okay, you know, just, I'm sure anyone that has one of these will go for the menus pretty quickly, but if you're going to do anything, you should generally, you know, initialize it before you start you know, editing or doing anything crazy. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to the computer now, so hold on. Now, just to show you some of the more unusual features of the MU2000, and the reason that I chose this one originally, is that it's the only unit that has a card slot. This uses smart media cards, which are, you know, not exactly new tech, but this is pretty much the only module I'm even aware of existing in this form factor and this price range that has an internal sequencer, which doesn't use like a floppy disk. So I don't really like smart media, but it's better than nothing. So anyway, and you know, that's just controlled by your sequencer here. And what you can do is this system is actually able to record and play back. It can play and record at the same time. So, for example, and this is basically how I rip MIDI files, so to speak. I mean, I'm not a coder, but what you can do is, okay, I'm just going to load up like GZ Doom here, for example. So, I don't know, let's do Shores of Hell, because no one ever does this level. So, you know, so as you can see right now, I've got the music's coming out of here. But if I want to record this to, you know, screw around with the MIDI file, you know, in this case, I'm just going to... See, this is the Yamaha MU2000 II. That's the actual port that I'm outputting MIDI on, which is how it gets to here. So if I just, for example, turn this to something internal for a moment. Now I'm going to come over here, got on record, push start, and now it's beginning. It's now. And now I can just record. And yeah, this is a really useful sequencer. If you're used to software sequencers, you usually, at least everyone I've used, you had to sit there, you basically have to pre-program all the instruments manually, which is a pain in the ass. But this is incredibly simple. You just hit record, and as long as you're recording before any sysx data gets transferred to the unit, it'll record that as well, meaning you basically just hit record and stop, and that's it. And this is incredibly useful when I do like X60000 MIDI recordings. Like a game like Super Street Fighter 2, for example, you know, you switch it to the MIDI mode, and then it sends the sysx. So, and that's easy to tell because you just watch the screen and you can tell when it receives new sysx data. So I'm like, okay, when I switch it to MIDI, it sends sysx. So, you know, I start the recording, then I set the sysx, then I switch it to MIDI, so the sysx gets sent to the recorder, or the sequencer, I should say, and then I just start playing the music. And then, of course, it's got a limited amount of memory, which is what this meter is. But as you can see, it is quite long. And then, you know, when I'm done, just escape and it stops. All right, it's got a Doom here. So yeah, you can use this on your computer. You can use this on pretty much anything. And then now that I've already recorded something, for example, I can, oops, skip that. And then just play. And there we go. I now have that wonderful classic Doom MIDI track now fully loaded into the MU2000. And yeah, this is, if you're like me and you know you're not a programmer and you just want to record some MIDI files to screw with them, this is just incredibly useful. It's simple, it's fast, and it just works. And no crappy setup bullshit. But anyway, and then, you know, normally what you would do, I'm not going to save this one, but you could then, you know, save it to the card so that you can load it later, because right now it's just in memory. Another thing to be aware of is, let's talk quickly about the plug boards. So I have the plug 150DR loaded. How these work is you can literally just override something that's already in there. So if, you know, if I set this, here's my part assign, and normally in almost all MIDI files, part is number 10. So, you know, you set it to that, and then you hit enter to set it. But what's really useful is, see, if you push it twice, for example, I hit it once, it sets it. I hit it twice, it actually gives me the code right there. So when you're working with any sort of software and you actually want a program for this thing, anything you do with the buttons, you can just double tap on this thing and it'll give you the code right there. So you know exactly what you just did. This is this makes things incredibly easier, since, you know, the manual is only in Japanese and most people don't even have a manual. Basically, you do something, boom, there's your code, and that's what you put into your MIDI software. I'm just showing this now, just so when I switch over to the software, I don't have to switch back to the camera. This video might be slightly out of order, but whatever. Okay, so anyway, that's about, you know, most of the basic stuff. I mean, you know, there's other stuff, like you can go into your Equalizer here and you know, whatever kind of you want. And when you're playing music, you can screw with these buttons and edit in real time. But the one thing you can't do is you can't edit and record at the same time. Like, you can play and record, you can play and edit, but you can't record, play, and edit all at the same time. But still incredibly useful. And, you know, I haven't messed with this, but there is also a sampler, which uses the AD inputs, so you can even, you know, record your voice on this thing if you want to. Okay, so that's pretty much the basics for as far as using this with your, you know. So just to recap, that's how I generally record my MIDI files that I want to edit, either off, you know, an X68000 or even my modern computer. I just use the sequencer in here. And this wheel also, you know, like Roland SC55, it works just fine on that. I've had no problems recording and playing back with that either, even though this is really more tailored for GM and XG. Yeah, okay, so let's switch to the software, which is kind of going to be the longer part of the video.